Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the UX World. This episode is brought to you by the Conversational Academy. If you're looking for a place to go to learn how to be a conversation designer, whether or not you're looking to break into the industry or whether or not you're in the industry looking to top up your knowledge, then this course by the Conversational Academy is exactly ideal for you. You should check it out. It's online, you can do it at your own pace, you can work through it at your own time. You don't have to go to a specific location at a specific time. It's put together by Hans van Dam of RoboCopy, presented by Hans van Dam. Really charismatic, really knowledgeable chap. We've had him on the podcast previously talking about this stuff. This course takes you through the details, the intricate details of everything you need to know to be a conversation designer. If you're looking to top up your knowledge, or if you're looking to learn to break into this space, you're looking to gather what it takes to design conversations and create voice user interfaces, then check out the Conversational Academy. The link is in the show notes, and if you're on the website, the link is on the website as well. Thank you, Conversational Academy, for presenting this episode. I'm a little bit quieter today. My son is asleep in his bedroom. We've been getting him into his cot. We've been trialing getting him out of our room, into his own room, into his cot, and his room is below my room where I am right now, my office, or studio should I say, if I want to be fancy. So I'm not shouting my mouth off. I'm trying to be a little bit quieter than usual. But on today's podcast, it's an absolutely amazing one. Dustin and myself have had an amazing conversation with Greg Hedges, the VP of Emerging Experiences at Rain. If you haven't checked out the podcast that we did last year with Rain Agency with Jason Herndon and Will Hall, check it out because it is a fantastic kind of door opener, should we say? Is that a phrase? Door opener? It opens the door to Rain Agency anyway, lets you know a little bit about what they're about and their three core pillars in voice of strategy, creativity and technology. And Greg today kind of builds on that and he shares a little bit about what's changed, you know, running and being part of a large voice agency solely focused on voice, building some of the most used and most headline grabbing Alexa skills and Google Assistant actions. They launched a pair of trainers with Nike with a Google Assistant action for Nike. They've launched the Kung Fu Panda skill with DreamWorks and Amazon Alexa. That's what we're going to talk about today with Greg, because Greg was involved in some of the design work for that. They've obviously worked with Tide, they've worked with Campbell's, they've worked with Starbucks, they've done stuff with Sesame Street. They've worked with a shed load of brands. So to understand from Greg what's changed in the environment and in the ecosystem from when they first started looking at this stuff in 2015 to what it's like now, and how the brands that they're working with, their understanding has developed and things have moved from more tactical implementations to more strategic implementations. So it's a really good conversation to get a grip of what's changed and where the landscape is right now. And then we talk about a little bit about Kung Fu Panda and about the techniques used and the process used, and working with intellectual property from DreamWorks and working with voice actors and all this kind of stuff. Is really interesting to get into that kind of things with Greg. And we've got a few sound effects from the skill as well to take us through the different sections of this podcast. The first section, chamber one, should we say, is focused on Rain, focused on what's changed from now, or rather from 2015 to today. And then the second phase is looking at Kung Fu Panda and some of the techniques and tools and processes used in building out that skill. So absolutely immense conversation. We absolutely loved it. This is Rain Week on the podcast this week. We've got Matt Lang of Rain Agency and Nick Rovisa talking to us about the work they've been doing with Nike and with Unilever. So there's 2 episodes this week, both with Rain, and it's absolutely immense stuff. You're going to learn a heck of a lot this week from the best in the business. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is Greg Hedges from Rain on VUX World.
VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. VUX World. Branding with the big faces. I love listening to it. Kane Sims, the one and only. Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims. Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado,
Welcome to the show.
that is awesome! We can start right away. Step with me into the first chamber.
Cool. Okay. Well, hello there. Dustin, how's tricks?
What are tricks, Kane? Is this Englishism coming through again?
Yeah, have you never heard this phrase, house tricks?
Never heard it. No, it reminds me of Trick cereal. You have that in the UK?
No, we've got some cultural barriers here.
We're just not going to be able to bridge this. I think we're going to need Greg to step in and see if he can translate between the two of us, perhaps.
If we're talking about cereal, I love cereal and happy to spend as much time digressing into that as possible.
Do you say house tricks? Have you heard that phrase before, Greg?
Never. Really? I thought of the same thing when you said it. I thought about the bunny and some fruity cereal.
Wow, that's interesting.
So it means, how are you doing?
It just means how's things, how's stuff going?
Oh, well, in that case, tricks are great, Kane. How's tricks with you?
Tricks are just fine, absolutely fine. Greg, how's tricks?
Tricks are great. I'm living the life.
Fantastic. Boys and girls, we are joined by Greg Hedges, the VP of Emergent Experiences at Rain. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. It's great to, or having me, sorry. Thanks. Great to talk to you, Kane. It's great to talk to you. I hear your voices all the time. And I think, what you all are doing and the conversations you're having and facilitating are such an important part of us all as the voice community at large, really learning from each other because there's so much happening and so many great things happening. So I appreciate you wanting to even have me be part of that conversation. So thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Rain, so we had Will Hall and Jason Herndon on the podcast previously. That was probably, I forget when it was. It might have been kind of May or June time last year. And it was a really, really interesting episode. One of the literally one of the best ones I think we had. It was all around those three pillars that you have at Rain, the technology, creativity, and strategy kind of philosophy, which is really, really interesting. So looking forward to this. And we've got another podcast this week, which in fact, by the time this one is out, we would have already had it with Matt and Nick as well, discussing some of the other stuff you've been going on there. So we've got a Rain week this week, Greg.
I think hopefully our listeners will appreciate that, but we certainly do. So yeah, this is great.
I think so. I mean, so Rain, for those that don't know, Greg, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and about Rain. But Rain at the moment is the leading agency, isn't it, over in America for voice first stuff?
We're certainly, we are enjoying a good run here and having some great conversations and been able to work with some great brands and companies in order to help them figure out where they should even execute in voice, let alone build some of these skills or actions or other applications that we'll talk a little bit about here. But yeah, we've been around for quite a while. Over the last few years, we've been more focused in on the voice landscape. We like to consider ourselves as sitting at the intersection of marketing and technology. So we have, I think, the conversation you had with Will and Jason, we have the full service of creative strategy and engineering in-house. So we can not just propose things that may be fun but can't be built, or we can't just, we don't just make things that or design things that have a lot of flash but maybe not ladder up to a larger goal, or we don't just build things that may not be based in some consumer needs or some business goals. We really think about it holistically, and so having everybody at the table having those conversations allows us to take advantage of the opportunity that we were afforded by being a pioneer in voice and conversational AI, and really think through some great, hopefully it felt that way, experiences for our clients. We like to think in systems, which I know is something that I believe Will and team talked about in the last time as well. But we really like to think about how voice fits in the overall ecosystem for an organization. And so it's not just a one-off or a shiny object, even if it might, be a promotional tool. It still should tie into the larger ecosystem. So we really think about that. I think over time, our kind of level of altitude of where we've operated has evolved quite a bit, as one would expect. But it used to be that we got very tactical requests. Can you build this, recipe experience, or I'd like this very specific, naming skill or whatever it might be. And now people come to us with some of the bigger questions they're facing because they believe in voice. They see a little bit more about where it's going, either because of what you all are doing, others are doing, or how we've educated them. And now they want to know about what their strategy for voice should be over the next several years. And they're thinking about it in a way that maybe they didn't think about things when it came to mobile or social or other things that organizations may have played a little bit close to the chest or even missed the boat on. And so they're seeing, where this is all headed. And fortunately, we're getting to work with some of them. If I guess just a little bit about me, I've been at Rain for the last 9 years, and really enjoyed my time here. I've been in digital marketing over the last 19, and started out in graphic design. So I started, in more of even a print and website kind of background, and worked with a lot of both on the agency side, but also in-house. I worked with some comic properties back with King Features, who owns the rights to like Popeye and Betty Boop and a lot of comic characters that are kind of the old school characters of the past. But got to do some fun things, kind of learning about my design skills and how to engage people through those means. And then found my way into teaching for a little while. I taught graphic design at Syracuse University for quite a bit. And I guess 4 years, it's not necessarily quite a bit, but a little while. And then found my way to Rain. So it's been a good journey. And then, 2015, in working with a client, found my way into voice, which brings us here today.
What, from pivoting to voice in 2015, and when we spoke to Will and Jason, that was one of the things that they said was that Rain now focuses exclusively on voice, and going back to 2015, it wasn't the Echo wasn't even out in the UK at that point. Presumably it had just launched in the US, so you're obviously in there pretty early on. And then you mentioned that now clients are coming to you asking some of the bigger questions, which I'm assuming they weren't doing that in 2015. So what's changed in the voice landscape from your perspective as an agency servicing clients? What's changed either from your perspective in the way that you're thinking about voice, or from a client's perspective in terms of how the clients are wanting to approach it?
Yeah, I think in terms of how the clients are wanting to approach it, I think what we've seen even is a shift into where voice sits within an organization. At first, when we were starting to work with brands in 2015, it was a lot in the innovation teams, right? Like it's kind of emerging in the space that people have the right to play with some of these newer technologies where they're not 100% sure where they want to bet the future on. But we've seen it actually shift into marketing capacities, into even into the technology and kind of IT world and information systems. People are really thinking about this more holistically. They're thinking about it not just in terms of when people think about voice. Quite often, when we first start talking to them, they do think of the cylindrical device on a desk. They think of an Echo. They think of a Google Home, and so. Now that's actually branching out, and people are thinking of the broader implications of this. People come asking about things like voice search, or even how to think about voice commerce, or maybe even they have some thing or need that they've thought of that might be a little bit more bespoke, where we might want to integrate voice into another one of our channels or one of our products in order to help create a better experience for their customers, whoever they might be. So we are definitely seeing that shift in terms of how people think about it. And I think it's just some of it's the natural evolution. It is, something that's stuck around for a little while. So now people are starting to figure out some of it is it's kind of the cultural impact of it. It's being talked about. And so, the more it's being talked about, the more they want to understand it and figure out how to harness some of that energy. And the other is, I think it's the realization of what we wanted to do forever. We've been kind of painting this, from the beginning, and science fiction and everywhere else. And now we're at this place where it's possible. And so I think there's just a lot to think through and a lot more implications that come from it, tying back to all those places where voice can touch, that you have to think about it in the right way, or the impact, if you really believe in it, it can be quite powerful in the wrong way to miss out on it. And I think, again, where people have sat and watched the sidelines, or on the sidelines, I should say, in the past with something like social, or mobile, this is something where the stakes are maybe even higher, because voice can be in more places than, a keyboard or, any other of those examples can be. Voice can just impact us in a more powerful way. It says something about how we need to understand the people we're talking to, and about kind of even how we surface. There's the risk, and I think, when people talk about voice search, there's often that risk that they think of being invisible, because what happens if someone searches for us? We can't see pages. We can't have a conversation around pages of search results now. we need to have an answer. And so how do we become that answer? So I think it's a lot of that. It's like, it's the evolution, it's the cultural side, but it's also the impact of where it's going once they believe.
Greg, what are some of the biggest surprises for you if you think back to your mindset when you were first getting into this, when Rain asked you or you approached the Rain, hey, I want to work on voice, compared to where it is today? How does that line up? Is it about what you thought, or is it quite different?
In some ways it's about what I thought, but it's a lot different at the same time. So, I mean, I had the excitement of it. I remember, working on, had been working on the digital strategy and kind of figuring out, for Campbell's, what their recipe property, Campbell's Kitchen, should be like. What's their system? What's their ecosystem in terms of their website, their app, their email and social and everything else, and how they all fit together. And really what we surfaced through that was, that people wanted a voice of authority to tell them what to make for dinner. And in any event, we, in creating the experience around that, from a creative standpoint, it was amazing to me. I'd been working and trying to create and plan for these visual experiences for my entire career. And now I had this thing that had no visual attached to it, and had me more excited, I think, than some of the things I'd ever done before, probably apart from teaching. And I think it was just, for me, it just all started to fall into place. I remember sitting on a plane. We had gone to Seattle. I'd gone to Amazon's offices. There may have been like 40 or 50 skills at the time, but they saw the promise of where it was going. We saw the promise of where it was going. And we had met with a few potential clients out there. And I just sat on the plane and just wrote all the articles I wanted to write about voice, voice in healthcare, how it's going to help people with dementia, and voice in education, how it could revolutionize, the classroom experience for students, and gaming. And it just trickled out of me, just all the excitement. And I saw this as my future at that point. And I just saw all the different ways that it could touch retail, everything that we've started to see come to life, the healthcare I mentioned before. And that, big news on that last week in terms of Amazon opening up, just a kind of allowing in a different way for to get around some of the regulations, in terms of some of the privacy related to healthcare, which is very important. But again, I saw, for me, it's kind of what got me going and keeps me fueled. And, I do think a lot of that has come to life quite quickly. And I think, we're seeing a lot of movement, and just even just the way that we've shifted at Rain. It was kind of a side thing that we did for a client, and then it became everything that we're doing. And we see these communities like Voice 2 and other communities and people, and the Voice Summit, and there's so many ways that this has just blown up so fast. If you think about it, I mean, that's 4 years ago we're talking about. And 2 of which there wasn't, like you said, Kane, like there wasn't, globally, the perspective on it hasn't even been, that long. And then also, even just from a competitive standpoint, it hasn't even been that long. When you really think about it, a couple of years ago, we had Google Assistant, take more of a hold in terms of where it stood in the race. So in any event, I do think things have moved pretty quickly, Dustin, to answer your question, but certainly there's a lot more excitement to come. And, I guess we're along for the ride.
It's funny that you mentioned the HIPAA news, which was really exciting. I think that's perfectly illustrative to me of how we're getting to where we want it to be. I remember probably back in 2015, maybe early 2016 at that point, having a call with a couple people who wanted an Alexa skill built for them, who wanted to remind people to take their medicine and to have recommendations, or not recommendations, but alarms that says, hey, you need to take your medicine. And I remember having that conversation saying, well, you can do alarms, you can do notifications, you can do HIPAA. There's all these things you can do. And now, we're filling that in, and we're really able to do those things that we wanted to do all along. Has Rain's philosophy changed in how you approach building these voice applications over the past few years?
I think some of our processes changed. I wouldn't necessarily say our philosophy. I think that kind of system thinking has always been part of who we are. So I wouldn't say that side of things has really changed. It's evolved a little bit, the system and kind of how we think about all the places that it touches has. But in terms of, how we need to think about this, I guess as I'm thinking on the fly here, in some ways, I think thinking through what the impact of voice as an entry point might be, right? So, as we think about the system, if voice is an entry point, how are we going to make sure that we connect people to the larger ecosystem? How do we make sure that we tap into maybe some of the data that they're sharing with us in terms of their behavior, or that we collect because of the conversation, and then utilize that throughout the system in order to have a really true, bigger conversation with them over time. And I think that's kind of where we've always been. So I don't know if our philosophy has really changed, but certainly our process, in terms of, the creative side of it, and really weaving more and more of that into our process, as well as, really making sure that we're pushing all the right buttons in terms of the technology that we use and the systems that we're integrating with, and even our UX design process. That part has evolved for sure.
What are some of the examples of some of the things that might have changed, or some of the things that you do now that you didn't used to do?
Yeah, I think probably better for everyone. I was writing all the scripts for a long time. So for our first few experiences, I was pulling the levers there behind the scenes, and writing out the scripts and thinking through, the way that we approached it. I'm not, I'm belittling myself a little bit here, but we have a team of people that really have been able to pick that apart and think through, the way that we should consider a conversation. I think on the creative side, we've really been able to weave in a little bit more of that into our process, and certainly from a strategic perspective, because there was a time where we were getting some requests, a lot of them that were very tactical, that people knew exactly what they wanted. And there were some, at first where we always would try to pump the brakes a little bit and say, like, should we really make that naming skill? Should we really do this thing? Are you sure it's going to give you what you want in the end? Over time, we've been actually able to harness those conversations into more of a strategic roadmap, and help them see the bigger picture of really what do we want to impact? What are we trying to do? Not just from an inside of the house kind of goal conversation, but those are important. But also from a consumer need perspective, what do they really need, and what conversation are they looking to have? And then also what's out there. Like if we've done a few recipe skills, and the space is pretty cluttered. And so as we do, if we were ever to consider another one, it's really important to map out, where does this fit? And so I think like from that strategic side, that's probably been some of the biggest shift, is just making sure that we are pushing the conversation in the right direction, and also pushing it out too, as I mentioned before, not just thinking about a skill or an action, but the bigger picture of what voice means.
You mentioned also that the technology's changed. Is that how has that sort of changed? Is it that you're using different tools? Is it that you've got different processes? What's changed on the technology side? Yeah,
I mean, in terms of the development efforts, I think our team, and you talked to Jason before, Steven Hansen, who's our CTO, was right by my side in those first days of creating our first skills. Yeah, I think we've been able to, make sure that as we're building, we're not building, one-offs either. We're building through this kind of system, even internally and externally. There's a framework called Voxa that we created. And so that is out there. It's an open source framework that allows us to make sure that we can build these experiences and make sure that we're thinking about the experience, and that as we think through how it deploys, or how we build the interaction model, that those things are obviously very important considerations, but that we can utilize whatever, if it's Dialogflow, or if it's Alexa, whatever platform we're using, we can kind of speak in their language, but it's always starting from like the experience perspective. But our developer's been amazing in terms of shaping that, and even we're always evolving it, and the community is helping evolve it too. But we are always updating that. So we've always tracked analytics, and I know we may talk about a little bit about that today, but we've integrated that into Voxa. We've, made sure that people can have an easy way of managing the content within their skills using Voxa. And so from a development perspective, we just continue to evolve that, as well as the tools that we use, in terms of any of the integrations that we may need to make, or maybe even have to build for people. So in some cases, we may need to update an API or build one in order to access some information, so that we're making sure that we're not just kind of making something that goes off into the ether. If we're really going to have a conversation with the people that we're building these experiences for, then we need to make sure that we're capturing that in some capacity so that it can be utilized elsewhere.
And so you touched on this a little bit in that you're building for, an extended period of time. You don't want it just to be a one-off. And then you talked about the analytics as well. When you're building these out, what type of data do you look at and how do you track that?
Yeah, so as we're building an experience, we initially, as others might, like, we're going to think through, what are we trying to get out of this? What are those KPIs? And we'll think through those higher level areas of, where we're trying to move the business or, affect in terms of, the business goals that exist. But then when we get down to actually planning the experience, we actually go through, so we create a state machine, so that we can make sure that we track progress. And we use a state machine diagram. And within that diagram, we will track every single response, and even in between, the paths that exist there, we're making sure that we're tracking an event. So we use Google Analytics, and we will track everything from where it is to for a label we're using, maybe it's a slot, so we're capturing in some information so that we know exactly what was said, and we can map that back later on to perhaps enhancements that we need to make. We also integrate with Dashbot, so we're tracking and making sure that we are using a platform that was designed for conversation as well for tracking analytics. And then when we do our reporting, we can come in and we can say, here's the big picture of where things are at in terms of the goals that we have. Here's some examples of how people are actually using the experience. Maybe here's some places where it's not working so well and we may want to focus on optimization here. Here's some places that, for instance, we did a skill for an insurance company that had a glossary of insurance terms that were part of it, as well as different types of insurance that they sold. And we made sure that we backfilled the slot with all the sort of extras that people might ask about that we may not just have an answer for right now. And then we're able to come to them and say, here's what people are asking for that you don't offer right now. Here's the type of insurance they think you offer, or here's this definition of this term they don't seem to understand. You should have something for that. We should update the skill for that. And here's an indication of where people might want to go. And so it really allows us to understand kind of the full path through there, if that makes sense. We really want to just, we don't blanket it with analytics just to kind of track everything. It's really to allow us to tell the holistic story of the journey through the experience, as well as, where we can make it a better conversation moving forward.
Is that what are you using Google Analytics for that bit, for tracking the things that people are saying that you don't cater for? And
we do, yeah, as much as possible.
So how do you get hold of the things that people are saying that you have a response to?
Yeah, so I mean, some of it relates to the intents that we already kind of plan for, right? So we just make sure that we plan through a slot that it's very robust. It goes, kind of within our world beyond what we might offer. So we're making sure that we're kind of digging deep. So that's part of it. And then, certainly with other, like Alexa, we don't get the transcript of what someone says, but we get enough of their intent. And then on Dialogflow, we do get a little bit more information. So we're able to track some of that and store and then kind of review that if we need to for updating things moving forward.
And can you just explain a little bit about how you go about because I'm assuming most people listening to this will use the standard Alexa dashboard, and they might use Dashbot. We've had Artie Merritt on the podcast last year talking about the Dashbot platform. Really, really interesting stuff. But so that from a Google Analytics, from a Google Assistant perspective, gives you quite a lot, because I think Google give you a lot more data in the first place, whereas the standard dashboard for Alexa isn't necessarily that detailed. So how do you go about setting up tracking for Google Analytics, and what extra information do you get from that?
So we will integrate Google Analytics, set up an account, and we've actually built it into our Voxa, which has a command line interface. It's for people that are far better developers than I am, but certainly can be used. But yeah, we will go through and make sure that in our state machine diagram, essentially all the stops in our state, right? Like all the responses that are there, we will just, we have an event code, line that we'll put in there that allows us to track that information. So, it just becomes something that it's like any other digital property, that we have this entity that's there, and now we're passing it information as if it's a website or an app even, but we're telling it, specifically this is in the help flow, or this is in the first chamber, or, any of the other kind of places within the experience that we might want to group things. And then we try to do it in very human terms, like this is someone asking for a recipe. And then within that, we'll have a label of they asked for a chicken recipe or a kid-friendly recipe or, a soup recipe. And so then we'll know how many times someone's done that. And so, yeah, it just becomes a matter of some of the more adept people in our development world translating what us on the creative UX and strategy side are putting out there into our diagram of what we're looking to collect.
I can imagine that being quite useful, because I'm assuming that with that you'll then be able to use like the event floor and get a diagram of how people have progressed through the skill. If you're tracking each stage as an event, you'll be able to actually see where people drop off and all that stuff within Google Analytics, won't you?
That's correct. Yeah, totally what we do. We're watching that behavioral flow, and Dashbot. I mentioned them. Like they obviously have some offerings there in relation to the flow, and they're more voice focused. So they're going to talk about intents in terms of what's being triggered, and you're going to get a little bit of that more interaction model based knowledge. That's just a voice platform. It's done with that in mind. So you get a little bit more focused analytics there, but with Google Analytics, we've found that we've been able to really, collect the sea of information, and then we can kind of operate on that and help tell the story of what's happening.
You've mentioned Voxa a few times. I think everyone listening would probably give me all kinds of abuse if we didn't have a little bit more of a closer look at what Voxa is. I'm looking on the website, and it looks like, what is it, like a framework or something like that?
That's right. It's a framework. It doesn't have a GUI. It's definitely a command line interface that you interact with, but it's how we develop all of our experiences. And we created it to allow us to do that in a more consistent manner, and also to make sure we launched this several years ago. And so, we wanted to put something out that other people could leverage some of the knowledge that we had been gathering in terms of our practices and build some voice experiences. And so we will actually utilize it. So while it doesn't have a GUI on our side, the team that I work with, our user experience team, we have a spreadsheet, and we call it our VUI doc, but it's essentially where we'll put our responses, our slots, and our developers can export that, and it is ingested into Voxa. And then that paired with, we use Lucidchart. And so Lucidchart will create a state machine diagram. So us on the UX side, we'll work with the development team and kind of demonstrate the logic of the experience. And then that also can be built in Voxa, as well as some of it, including the analytics, and even ingested into Voxa now as they export some of the flow.
Have you come across Voxa, Dustin?
I believe so. So, Greg, then it's something that anyone can use. It's not just for internal use inside of Rain.
Yeah, that's correct. It's one of those things that is out there for public use, and it's an open source framework. So I know people make suggestions or contribute to it. It's one of those things. We also put out a product a while back called Reverb, which was way before Amazon had integrated Alexa into the app, and we wanted to give people a way. It was initially started as a way for us to have our testers just have better access to Alexa, but it was something that a lot of people ended up downloading and using because it had a Mac OS version, an Android version, and an iOS version. So yeah, it's just we want to make sure that what we're building has a purpose, and we think of it, and we think of ourselves as part of the bigger community. And not saying that this won't evolve over time, and I think there's a lot that could be done with what Voxa is and represents, but it does allow us to make sure that, again, that what we're building can be utilized, and that we can do it so in a way that, for instance, when we worked with Headspace, a meditation company, we created an Alexa skill for them. They already had their platform and their service, so we kind of just extended it into Alexa. And then they wanted to be on Google, and so we were able to utilize the what we've built through Voxa in order to push that out. And there are more enterprise versions of this as well. So we've taken some of this technology and worked with some of our clients in order to leverage the kind of the realities of Voxa, but kind of up the levels and up the game for them to maybe have a broader view into their voice experience platform, or tell the story of what's happening, across their divisions if they're a larger organization, and help just kind of tie everything together.
All right, loving that Kung Fu Tude. Let's enter the second chamber.
So, I mean, that first part there was absolutely fantastic. I think that was a really, really interesting discussion there. And you mentioned that you used to do a lot of the design work, and then you kind of moved into more of the kind of strategic stuff, but you did kind of revisit your kind of voice roots recently with the Kung Fu Panda skill, did you not?
Did, yes. It was nice. It was nice to get back in and be able to start kind of designing a bit more, which was great.
Because it's interesting, because I've seen, I don't know whether you've seen what Jovo do sometimes. They do like a Testing Tuesdays, Florian Holland and Jan Koenig, two people who we've had on the podcast. Florian has done some co-hosting with us before as well. And yeah, so I come across the Kung Fu Panda skill through that video on YouTube, and then literally, as luck would have it, we spoke literally about 2 days after I'd seen the video, and then you told me that you were involved in the design of it. So I thought, well, why not kind of have a bit of a discussion about it? Because it's, from a sound design perspective, it's really good. It's engaging for kids and stuff like that, and it's really well kind of put together. So I thought it'd be interesting to sort of dig into it. Do you want to give us the kind of overview of what it is and the kind of backstory behind it?
Sure, absolutely, yeah, and again, it was fun to be able to work on, because, like you said, it kind of it comes to life on its own almost. But being able to kind of take that and build it into an experience is quite fun. So we've worked with different entertainment organizations before, and we've worked even with Amazon before, on some of the properties that they work with for Prime Video, or for any of their other relationships that they have, maybe throughout their promotion side as well. But they came to us and asked, about working with them on an experience for Kung Fu Panda. Kung Fu Panda is a movie, and a lot of people know Poe and the characters from that show or movie kind of because of the movies, but it also is a video series that launched on Prime Video. And so as a way of tying into that world, Amazon and DreamWorks wanted to put something together that could live in Alexa and allow kids to experience some time training with Poe. And so that's what it was really all about. It was us, they gave us a playground, and then within that, we kind of dug into the series and the movie and the property, and really understood, more about who this character is, and kind of, the personality of Poe. And certainly he's got a band of students that are pandas that follow him along. And so we thought through, what would it be like for a kid to come into this world and to be part of it. They kind of look up to Poe. He's the master. And so how do we take kids on a journey to become more like Poe? And so that was really what we thought about. And we knew we wanted to be a game, and Amazon and DreamWorks knew that as well. So we, at that point, just kind of opened up the door to think through, what would it be like to earn your Kung Fu, training, and to go through that experience. And so we thought about it, really dug into the show, saw that concept of chambers, and they talk about 4 constellations, but there are 4 panda students, so that made sense to have 4 chambers, and then a final training that really takes what you've learned and tests your knowledge that you've built around the principles of Kung Fu, as Po has trained you on, to then really make you earn your last step towards that black belt. So that's really what it's all about. There are kind of these 4 mini games and then a final chamber. And then once you've completed the game, you are more than welcome to kind of retrain or get your brother or sister or friends excited and have them come to it. And it's targeted towards 6 to 11-year-olds. So really, not necessarily. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. Not necessarily for my 4-year-old, but she played it and certainly enjoyed it. But we tried to mix in a little bit of kind of patience is one of the chambers, but a little bit of these skills around listening, skills around compassion, and really kind of trying to, think through situational experiences and how should we handle ourselves in those situations. It's a kid version of the kind of would you rather or do this or that type of thing, but it's something that was really interesting. And then also even working in some of the shouts and some of the more, I guess, recognizable areas of Kung Fu training, as we picture it. I'm sure Kung Fu expert would challenge us on the fidelity that we have to it, but at the same time, just kind of trying to tie into some of what people understand of it as well.
And you must have been working were you working fairly closely with DreamWorks then? So it seems as though you must have had access to the footage. I'm presuming, judging by the kind of audio within the skill, you must have had access to voice actors and things like that, did you? So how closely were you working with DreamWorks and Amazon on this?
We worked very closely with Amazon and DreamWorks as well. We're more closely with Amazon, and just because of this being more of a Prime Video series, and DreamWorks gave us access to all the voice actors from the show, so they were an important part of this too, and even approving the scripts and making sure that we were true to the property. So not to say that they weren't involved, but we definitely wanted to make sure that this was something where when kids came into it, they entered into the world of Po and his students. We didn't want to bring Alexa into that. Certainly she facilitates and gets you there, but you hear a gong at the very beginning when you invoke the skill.
You made it up the stairs. Great! Welcome to Kung Fu Panda Paws of Destiny.
And from that point forward, you are in the world of Kung Fu Panda. And so, that was really important to us to be able to work with the voice actors and make sure that it sounded like Po, make sure it sounded like the characters. And as far as the sounds go, we really also examined, we had our team dug in, and they really watched every episode of the series that we knew we would be able to pull from. And so we marked down, all the different sounds that were already part of that world, that were already part of, as we think in systems, kind of like part of that, the world that is Kung Fu Panda. And so we pulled those sounds in, found ways that they should, play naturally along with the scripts that we were preparing. And then, where we had gaps, we worked with their creative team and our creative team to help fill those gaps in.
Sounds like it's a bit different to what Rain have done in the past. You look at the Campbell's, the Tide, the Nike launch, the Unilever. Still, this in this case, you're still working with a really big company, really big brand. But in terms of the type of experience that it is, it's not necessarily something that is. So, for example, I don't know whether or not Rain have done any other kind of kids skills before. So, what was kind of different, or what were your kind of main learnings coming out of doing this in terms of doing something specifically for kids?
Yeah, certainly had some learning specific to Kung Fu Panda, but I guess just to the first part of what you were talking about there, we've been able and fortunate to work with a number of entertainment properties. So we did a skill for the movie Dunkirk. We did one for Scooby-Doo, where we got to work with the voice talent around Scooby-Doo and build kind of a mystery-based experience and game. We did Sesame Street when they first launched kid directed skills with Amazon a couple of years ago. I guess it was last fall or so in 2017. But we worked with Sesame Street at that point, and we've worked with they have a property called Ben 10 and another one called Lost in Oz. So we have some experience in the space, which has been good. And so we understand, the differences between a CPG and kind of building something in the entertainment space and what we're going to have to do there. And certainly all of those different experiences have, some are more games and some are more promotional type experiences. But in the end, we understand the story that we're trying to tell, regardless of whether that's a CPG or hospitality client or, someone in the financial space even. So that's kind of, how we approach it, is what story are we trying to tell? In the instance of Kung Fu Panda, it's actually funny how this comes full circle. As we were designing it, and it just, unfortunately, like right near the end of it, you had Paul Jackson, right, from the BBC.
Yeah.
And a lot of what he was talking about, we were experiencing firsthand at the moment as he was talking about CBBs and, how they were he gave a great example about the recording process there and how they kind of recorded some scratch tracks with people internally. We hadn't done that. We learned the hard way on that one, and his advice is very true. People who are doing this should listen and heed Paul's advice, because certainly you get into some times later on where you want to change it and it becomes harder. But we learned a lot, and just in terms of similar things to what Paul was saying in some of his other conversation, but really just about how you word things, like what kids are going to interpret when you say something. What's too challenging for a kid? And even, as we're going through and building, let's say, one of our chambers where we ask a question or we ask a kid to repeat some move that they just learned or the call that they just heard, they might not hear it the same way that we said it. And that can be okay. So really planning through a variety of mappings to what they might say. So it's not just that it says hi, maybe they heard hiya or some other kind of way at that. So being robust enough to understand that perfection can be different and it doesn't have to be so right, especially in this world. We're in the world of this kids focused game around Kung Fu. It's already, got a lot of fun that's involved with it. So why stop that? So, really thinking through that, putting people back on the right track. So if they make a mistake, making sure that we guide them in the right way and that we don't blame them and that we don't chastise them, that we give them a hint even about how to move forward. But then also understanding that if they get it wrong a few times, we don't want to keep them going forever in that kind of recursive loop and, see them, I guess, in the end, really not enjoy the time that they're having with us. And so at that point, even just giving them the option to move on and kind of come back at it, maybe when the time is right, or, they've learned a little bit more or whatever it might be. So, I think we learned, some learnings that probably in general help you no matter where you are. But certainly, I think some of those ones around the production of it were really some things that we've taken because we do a lot with voice recordings, and that's important to understand.
A lot of those things you were mentioning seem to be pretty applicable, whether you're building for kids or otherwise. Does Rain have the philosophy that you have people who focus just on games or just on business apps, or do you feel like there's enough overlap between the different types of things that you're going to do that it's really understanding voice in general that's more important?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, we are agnostic to like a vertical. So like we believe in what you're saying there in terms of that it's really not about, the level of expertise you have in that. We can become knowledgeable on something. We can bring in people, maybe if we need to augment our talents, if we need to understand, the finance world better than we do, we can either make sure that we do our due diligence in the strategy area and learn it all, or we can bring in some assistants to help us. But it really is about it's really about building a good conversation, in the end. And I think that's kind of what we've focused in on as it comes to skills and actions and in general, like, what do people want to talk about? How are they talking about it? What's the right path to progressively build this experience together? And then, how do we build something that is imbued with a little bit more emotional intelligence? I know you've had Sina Khan before, and he and I are working together on something related to emotional intelligence and kind of our thoughts on that. But it is so important to think through, what it is that people are thinking, feeling, wanting, and make sure that we're not just talking to them to talk, that we're actually listening. And I think that's a challenge for anybody, because a lot of brands, people, whatever, we all kind of talk from our perspective. I'm this person, I have this to say, thank you very much. Like, we're not always listening, even if we say we are. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. And our philosophy is listen, build a good conversation, give people what they need, and have a dialogue with them over time, not just maybe within this one channel, but across your many channels that you have.
Was there, on just skipping back to the Kung Fu Panda situation, you mentioned a few of the other things that you've been working on around Sesame Street and a few other kind of experiences. Is there anything in particular that is different about your approach to design in terms of your process? Have you got a different process that you'll use if you're designing something more kind of utility based than you would do if you were designing something more kind of like story or game based? What is the general kind of process, and does it change depending on what you're working on?
It does. I don't know that it changes so much. Certainly the application of what it is that we are building toward changes. And so some of the process may change. Like, for instance, the voice recording part of it, or who we might bring in from our team to help write it, because of the kind of more business bent they have versus a kind of dialogue for entertainment driven side. But no, I think our process in general is relatively, similar in the sense that we're going to we have these circles that we call them, but these areas of I mentioned them before, just these business drivers. What is it that moves the business? Who's the consumer? What do they need? And what's the ecosystem that we live in? What's the reality of that? What technologies, content do we have, and how do we find a way to move forward with those things in mind? How do we make those be our kind of center of gravity, our North Star that we can point to and say, we're being true if we do this? And then our process is very similar in the sense that, we are going to go through and map out the features that kind of ladder back up to that. And then we're going to start to map that onto an initial conversation. And then we're going to start to expand that out and design the conversation for all those error paths and variable paths and the nuances that we need to have. And then we'll layer on the production value and whether that be recording or whether that be an associated visual for some skills. We have emails, that we send out, or, even the account linking flow for a couple that we've built, like Starbucks or Campbell's or any of the others from the past. But, what are those other areas? APL, that's another, that's a huge area for skills, and certainly, is becoming one in the broader context of voice. What is that multimodal side of things? So we really need to think through that as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Kane, but it is something where our process is really meant to surface a good conversation, and then we kind of can write to the individual nuances of the industry or whatever we're working toward.
You spoke there about some of the stuff that you'd worked on in the past in terms of Starbucks and Campbell's and Tide. Were those all one-off things that you do and then you're finished with? And we could ask this, we could talk in the context of Kung Fu Panda as well. Like, are these things that you create, you launch, you deliver, and then you're finished with it? Or are these things that you create, launch, and deliver, and then you have a roadmap and you're iterating on it and they're constantly living and improving over time?
Yeah, the more fruitful ones, with everything we build, we try to put a roadmap to it. So certainly is something that we want to have. I think some, you hit different places in time when you work with different organizations, and they're ready to move on a roadmap, and sometimes they're not. So I don't know that we've always been able to execute on our roadmap, but we certainly have one in mind. We always talk in the terms of crawl, walk, run. So like, what are we doing now? Kind of what's our MVP? What are we building towards in the long run? Where are we laddering toward, in terms of where this could evolve? So we definitely are thinking about that. And it isn't always something that we get to do, though. I think is kind of the reality of it is, but it is something that's part of the process, and that we're preparing people, even if it's not us that they continue to work with, we're giving them all the tools, the roadmap, the analytics, the kind of the strategy, hopefully, if we've been able to work on that with them, to move this forward when they're ready to.
Okay, that's what I like to hear. Let's enter the third chamber.
So, Greg, moving on a little bit, this Kung Fu Panda skill, how is this promoted? It's such a big topic of discussion among skill developers, is getting that usage. How did you get people to start using it?
So we certainly did our own promotion as much as possible via our channels, which only go so far. But Amazon, having them as a partner here was, it was their. In the end, it was a Prime Video series they were looking to promote, so they were able to get some support for it via some of the Alexa channels that exist, and DreamWorks certainly did some promotion as well via their social. So, something that I'm sure there are some other ways that it could get some word of mouth out there, or even get some visibility, but it was promoted mainly via Amazon and kind of via the Alexa channels to draw people into the experience.
So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is if you need to promote a skill, you need to ask Amazon and DreamWorks to promote it for you, and then it'll be smooth sailing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the broader picture of how we promote or how we advise our brands to promote experiences, it's definitely a mix of paid, earned, and owned. Like, you want to make sure that it is not an if you build it, they will come world. Like, that is something that no matter what we're building, voice or not, that you're going to make sure you drive people to it. I think people forget quite often because they get caught up in like, oh, we're going to have to spend a lot of money to promote this skill to get people to use it. But there are so many people that they're already having a conversation with via their own channels that if you just do a little bit there, that can help you dramatically. So promoting on your own social channels, promoting on your website, sending the newsletters out to your lists, and really doing, your due diligence in terms of, supporting it using the audience you have. And then, of course, it'd be great to go out and do some paid as well. So where you can, making sure that you've done enough to capture an audience and kind of bring some of those voices in that you can talk to. And then hopefully get some good reach too. So the Jogos of the world, there's been a few good YouTube videos that have helped promote Kung Fu Panda. I saw one of two sisters that were playing and actually acting the whole thing out. It was really cute. So there's some of those moments that happen and that you can get some reach maybe there as well.
So is that part of Rain's offering then, is the skill marketing?
We will do some of that. Yeah. I mean, we focus a lot on the building, but we've definitely helped brands figure that out. Some have taken it on themselves. Some of them, they really feel like this becomes, another initiative for them, that they kind of have machines that drive forward on that, and some great teams that do that already for them. But we have helped some brands figure out, what is it, built some tools for them, whether that be a website or, kind of some email marketing or whatever it might be to help them. So it's a conversation we're totally willing to have, with anybody that needs that help. And of course, important to make sure that these things get seen, because we could build the greatest thing in the world and it might get, very little use. And I don't know, that could be good or bad. I guess it'd be bad in the sense of the people that paid for it, and probably bad for the people that made it. But I would say it probably nets out in not so great of a place. So getting as many eyes on it as possible is really helpful, and we're willing to do whatever we can to try to get that to happen.
Is it still kind of, because I know I know that this is on a smaller scale, but doing the podcast, I know there's a lot of effort that goes into creating an episode. There's a lot of the time invested beforehand. There's a lot of time invested in the edit, and then by the time it's done, the next one is literally on your doorstep, so your attention focuses to get the next one ready. So it's kind of like, I can see how that bit might end up getting overlooked, because I'm guilty of that myself in terms of not doing anywhere near enough promotion to get the word out about the podcast kind of thing. But is that something that as you're going through the process of creating these voice experiences, is this something that brands are discussing and thinking about throughout that process, or is it a similar kind of thing where it's kind of like, okay, it's done now and it's kind of done and delivered? Are they thinking about it throughout, or is it something that they think about afterwards?
Yeah, that's definitely been something that's evolved throughout this time that we've been working as well. Certainly now, yes, absolutely. People are, and we're trying to help them. So that's something that we bring into the conversation very early. Like, how are you going to promote this? We want to know what the measures of success are, but we also want to understand how are they going to take it out to the world and bring people in, and where might we be able to help, and start to have that conversation early. So yeah, absolutely. That's something that brands are thinking about early. I don't know that it always gets the support that, that everyone would hope for, but it definitely is something that, we're trying to make sure that we think through, and it's part of building a good experience too. If for instance, with your podcast, you all do a great job with this. People talk about it. It starts to make its way around. It's certainly made its way around Rain in terms of, wanting people to listen to it, because it's something that you're sharing something of value. We have great conversations. And so if we're doing our job right, there'll be a little bit of that as well, right? There'll be, if we can get it into the right hands, there'll be a little bit of kind of natural push that happens from it, because we've done something that people want to come back to or that they want to share. So we need to give them mechanisms to do that. But certainly is something that we think about as well, making something that's people want to talk to and with. So yeah, it's definitely, that is one of the hardest areas of all of this, though, is making sure that we get people to the things that we make. And it's a good conversation, but one that I think brands understand they're going to have to get involved with and support in some fashion.
And I think that's, certainly it's that what you were just saying there in terms of the natural spread through people in the community and stuff like that. That's exactly how I found out about Kung Fu Panda. That was through the YouTube videos.
Yeah, it helps, and it's good. It's helped keep that conversation going, and I'm glad it's allowed for this one to happen. I think it's also allowed. We just launched a UK version on Friday, so it's a couple of days old from the recording of this, but it's something where we're hoping in terms of a roadmap that perhaps some of that conversation that's happening, that Jovo and others are helping spread around the world, and that you all will know too, might give this skill some additional legs to extend the conversation further.
Well, the link will be in the show notes. I was testing it out before the call, and as I say, it's really good. I didn't realize it had only just been launched as well, so I'm lucky to be one of the people on there in the first few days. If people want to try that, the link will be in the show notes. I'll put the links to Voxer. You mentioned Lucid Charts as well. I'll put the link for that. I'll also link to the Paul Jackson podcast, because that is an epic one for anybody designing anything for kids, and even not for kids, just designing in general. It's a fantastic podcast. Greg, anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners? How can people reach Rain? How can people reach you? How can people figure out and find out what you're up to? Reach out to you if they want to work with you, all that kind of stuff. What's the best thing for people to do?
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to hear from anybody that wants to have a conversation. So if you want to reach out, you can certainly find me. I'm Greg H at rain.agency. And if it's a more kind of general question and you don't want to reach out to me directly, feel free to reach out at hello@rain.agency. But would love to talk to anyone and figure out how we might be able to help or just maybe augment some of the conversation we've had here.
Cool. I can also vouch for the Rain blog, because you put a few things out there quite often, and it is really good reading, and the newsletter as well. Actually,
yeah, I was going to say the Rain newsletter.
Yeah.
Our one of our founders is the voice for our Voice on Voice now flash briefing too. So feel free to check out our Voice on Voice flash briefing, and you'll get to hear from some of the people that made us. So it's a big. We're doing more and more. It's great to be able to talk about it, though.
Fantastic. Greg, this has been absolutely immense. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for the great questions and conversation. And let me know if there's any other time we want to get on and talk more about voice. Always happy to do it.
Oh, you have to go. Okay, we can pick up where we left off next time.
That was Greg Hedges of Rain Agency. Such an interesting company, Rain. I mean, going from doing a lot of visual stuff, website builds, digital marketing and digital sort of projects, pivoting solely into voice. Big move, bold move, but it's obviously paying off. I mean, you heard the kind of clients they're working with. You know, they work with Sesame Street, DreamWorks, Amazon, Unilever, Nike, Campbell's, Tide. You know, they are the place to go for the big brands to create really, really good and world-class voice experiences, and to have the opportunity to speak to Greg and Nick and Matt this week as well is absolutely immense. If you haven't listened to the podcast, I haven't debated when it's going to go out yet, actually. Either the one with Matt and Nick is going to be out before this, or it'll follow this, either one. So if it is out before this and you haven't listened to it, go and check it out, because it's going to be absolutely immense, talking about the Nike case study. They used Google Assistant to launch a pair of trainers for Nike. And talking about Unilever as well, working with brand influencers and the crossover between voice and social, and how voice is similar to social, and or what social was when it was first kind of blowing up. So if it's out now, check it out. If it's not out now, it'll be out later on this week, so do pay attention and jump on that. But yeah, interesting to chat to Greg and see the journey that they've been on, you know, going from pivoting straight into voice and how it's changed. Brands are now more educated than they were, and I've noticed that myself. You know, I was at the Technova Voice event a few weeks back and did the kind of opening breakfast session there, and usually last year when I was asking people what have they done in the voice space, and are they involved in voice, and you know, or are they just kind of interested, more often than not people were just interested, you know, sitting on the sidelines, paying attention, interested, you know, wanting to learn more, but hadn't really done much in this space. You ask the same question at events this year, and most people have done something. They've either built a skill, or they have a device, or they are seriously thinking about it for their brand. So the scene has moved on, and Rain have obviously got some really great experience in terms of tracking that shift and the development. So really interesting stuff, and to learn. Good to see that Greg is still keeping his fingers in the old pie, keeping his awe in the dialogue design stuff, and working on the Kung Fu Panda skill. Check it out if you've got kids, and even if you don't, just check it out anyway, because it's a good skill, good sound design. You know, really professional sound, and as you'd expect from DreamWorks and Amazon and Rain, it's really worth it. Really nice to see some of the processes used, some of the workflow, and some of the techniques used as well. So yeah, absolutely amazing. Thank you, Greg, for joining us. Thank you, Dustin, as always, boys and girls. Thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.